"The help eats in the kitchen," my son's wife sneered. I smiled, dialed my phone and said, "Canceled the $30 million contract." My son went pale, realizing IT was too late. I am Eloise Hayes. I am 72, and tonight is the night I learned my place in my own son's story. The air was thick with the scent of magnolias drifting in from the river, the kind of Charleston evening where the sky turns copper before it folds into black. I had worn a pale silk dress, and the pearl earrings my mother gave me, thinking they might still mean something. From the front lawn I could hear the quartet playing under the twinkle of string lights. It was supposed to be a night of family celebration and pride. Instead of being led toward the long table at the center of the reception, I was steered through a side door into a cramped room behind the kitchen. Servers in white shirts moved past me with trays of oysters and champagne. Their shoes tapped against the tile. Their voices hushed as they glanced in my direction. The table they pointed me to was wedged between a rolling part of stacked plates and a swinging door that slammed each time someone carried food to the guest outside. Harper, my new daughter-in-law, swept in, wearing her lace gown all teeth and diamonds. She stopped near the counter where the servers waited and spoke just loudly enough for her words to carry. "The kitchen help can eat back here." She didn't look at me. Her eyes passed over my shoulder through me as if I were nothing more than wallpaper. A few of the staff shifted uncomfortably, pretending to focus on their trays. I caught sight of Lucas through the open doorway. My son, my only child, stood in a cluster of men discussing some new property deal. His cufflinks gleamed in the light as he adjusted them, nodding and smiling at the right moments. He had seen Harper's little performance. He had seen me. He did nothing. The champagne flute in my hand was cold, beaded with moisture. My fingers tightened around the stem as I felt the weight of the years between us. The laughter from the reception floated in tinny and distant, mixing with the clink of glassware. My pulse slowed. My mind cleared. I placed the untouched champagne on the table and reached into my small clutch. The phone felt solid in my hand, a familiar weight. I pressed one number. Victor answered on the second ring. "Cancel the $28 million real estate deal Lucas is planning to announce tonight." My voice was steady, almost gentle. There was a brief silence on the other end, the sound of a breath being taken. "Understood," he said. I closed the phone and slid it back into my clutch. The kitchen door swung open again, letting in a slice of golden light from the reception. I sat back in my chair and listened to the muffled music. Outside they were dancing, laughing, toasting to a future they thought was already theirs. In that small, overheated room, I let the quiet settle around me. It was not defeat. It was the first move. I was 38 when my husband died, leaving me with a mortgage of 4-year-old boy and a heart that felt like it had been hollowed out. There was no insurance windfall, no family fortune to soften the blow. What I had was a dining room table, a second-hand drafting lamp, and a degree in interior architecture I had not used in years. At night after Lucas was asleep, I would spread out tracing paper and sharpened pencils, telling myself that one day these lines would turn into something solid. Clients came slowly. At first, neighbors who wanted a porch, and closed a cousin of a friend who needed a restaurant facelift. I drafted contracts in the same spot where I set out breakfast, moving cereal bowls to make room for blueprints. Lucas learned early how to nap through the sound of my rotary phone, ringing his small body curled on the couch while I discussed tile samples with suppliers. He called my leather portfolio Mom's Magic Folder. Every time I zipped it closed, he would ask if it meant I had made money for groceries. By the time he was in high school, Hayes and Company had grown into a name people knew. Our work was in magazines. I had a staff of 10 and a studio with windows that looked out over the Ashley River. Lucas would stop by after soccer practice, tracking in mud and pointing at sketches pinned to the wall. Back then I thought we were building it together. When he met Harper, I tried to welcome her. She was sharp, ambitious, and her interest in the business was genuine. But soon I noticed changes. My signature wallpaper collection was suddenly rebranded under a new name. Brochures went out without my photograph, replaced by glossy shots of Harper and Lucas at stage sites. Invitations for the annual Legacy Brunch arrived for board members, investors, and even our junior designers, but somehow never reached me. I told myself it was an oversight, that maybe the marketing team was experimenting with a fresh image. But the truth settled in slowly, the way water seeps through a foundation, until one day you see the crack. I was still on the letterhead, still asked to smile for the occasional article about women entrepreneurs. But the decisions were no longer mine. Meetings were scheduled without me. Designs were approved in my absence. Clients I had cultivated for decades now spoke of Lucas as if he had dreamed the firm into being. It was not one big betrayal but a series of small deliberate erasures. Each one came wrapped in politeness, delivered with a smile that said nothing was wrong. I learned to keep my face steady, to nod in the right places, even as the work of my life shifted further from my hands. That is the thing about loss. Sometimes it does not roar in like a storm. Sometimes it drifts in quietly, moving the furniture around until you no longer recognize the room. 2 weeks before the wedding, Harper's assistant called my estate manager, with a breezy tone that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. She said the bride stylist would be picking up several pieces from the Hayes family vault. She rattled off a list that included my grandmother's sapphire ring, my mother's ivory comb, and a diamond brooch worn in every generation's wedding portrait. She added that I had already given my approval. I had not spoken to her in months. Ruth brought me the message with a look that asked whether she should push back. I told her no. Let them have what they think they are entitled to. Sometimes people tell you exactly who they are when they believe you will not stop them. That night, I imagined Harper in front of her mirror, turning her head to watch the comb. Catch the light sliding the ring onto her finger like it had been waiting for her. I let the picture settle in my mind. It was useful to know how comfortable someone could get wearing what was not theirs. On the day of the wedding, the air was thick and warm. While the guests were sipping champagne on the lawn, Harper was upstairs in the bridal suite posing for photographs. Tamara's flashed as she tilted her head just enough to show the comb and let the ring glitter against her skin. From the doorway, Ruth stood in her navy suit posture, straight voice calm. She said, "Mrs. Hayes requests the return of all heirloom items from her personal vault immediately." Harper laughed in that highway people do when they think they can charm the moment away. She said they were still taking photos, that she would return them after the honeymoon. Ruth didn't move. She held out a small velvet pouch and repeated herself, each word measured. The room went still. A stylus lowered her curling iron. Harper's eyes hardened, but her smile stayed in place. One by one, she removed the ring, sliding it off slowly, and placed it in the pouch. The comb followed her fingers, lingering as if it burned to let it go. Ruth gave a crisp nod and left without another word. 10 minutes later, she placed the pouch in my hands. The sapphire was cool against my skin, the ivory comb smooth from years of use. I closed my fingers around them, feeling the weight return. These were not just ornaments. They were proof of where I came from, and no one could take that from me again. In that moment, I knew my boundaries were no longer up for negotiation. The morning after the wedding, I called Victor and told him to put an immediate hold on all outgoing wedding gift transfers tied to my name. Harper had listed me as the sponsor for almost every lavish item on the registry, from a $10,000 travel fund to custom furniture and luxury luggage. I had never approved a single one. Within hours, the accounts were frozen. Vendors began receiving polite but final notices that no payments would be processed until further review. By the afternoon, the news had begun to drift through Charleston's social circles. It did not appear in the papers, but it moved through the city in low voices over luncheon tables and whispered comments at gallery openings. People said the Hayes matriarch was cleaning house. They said she had finally decided to stop footing the bill for others' ambitions. In the beginning, the tone was curious, even a little shocked. Then it shifted to respect. Former allies of Harper began stepping back. Invitations that had her name printed in gold suddenly went unmailed. One of her closest friends postponed a charity event where she had planned to appear, citing a scheduling conflict no one believed. It was not personal, at least not openly. In this world, people prefer to align themselves with the source of stability. Stability had just changed hands. That evening I sat in my library, the only room in the house where the light always seemed to fall in my favor. The air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Ruth entered with a thin folder and laid it on the desk. Inside was a list she had compiled. "These are the people still calling to check in," she said. "These are the ones who asked about you first, not the company." I scanned the names. Some were expected. A few surprised me. The list was shorter than it would have been a year ago, but every name on it was worth keeping. I closed the folder and met Ruth's eyes. This is how you play the long game. You do not announce every move. You watch. You wait. And when you shift the board, you do it quietly, so that by the time anyone notices, the game is already yours. Victor's office smelled faintly of cedar and coffee when I stepped inside. He closed the door himself, a sign that whatever we discussed would stay between us. I told him I wanted to amend my will. Most of the estate would be redirected to a scholarship fund for women from underrepresented backgrounds who wanted to study architecture. Lucas would receive a modest living allowance, enough to keep him comfortable, but never enough to give him control over anyone else's future. Victor nodded and began drafting the language with the precision of a man who understood there would be no second chances. That night, Ruth came to me with a look that said she had been holding something back. She had overheard Harper in the Heart and speaking to a friend on the phone. The words were casual but cold. Harper said it would be easy to prove I was slipping. That one confused statement, on record, could open the door for a judge to hand over my assets. She spoke as if I were an obstacle to be moved, not a person to be respected. Ruth stood quietly while I processed the weight of that. By morning, I had a plan. Every conversation I had with Lucas or Harper from that day forward would be documented. I dictated summaries into a recorder each night, dating and signing them before sealing them in envelopes for Victor's files. Financial access codes were changed. Accounts moved to institutions with stricter security. Ruth coordinated an audit of every point of access to my holdings, down to the secondary keys to the wine cellar. It was not fear that drove me. It was clarity. This was not only about protecting my wealth, it was about ensuring that my name, my work, and my story could never be rewritten by people who had not earned the right to hold them. By the end of the week, the scholarship trust was signed and funded. I left Victor's office with the certainty that my legacy now belonged to me again, and that no one would take it without walking through every locked door I had just built. The knock came late in the afternoon when the lake was still and the light had turned to gold. I opened the door to see Lucas standing there alone, his shoulders drawn in his suit, rumpled as if he had slept in it. The months had stripped the shine from his face. He said he had lost almost everything. Harper was gone. Deals had fallen through. Friends had disappeared. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges worn from being handled too much. Inside was a crayon drawing from when he was small. A stick figure of me in an apron holding a hammer with the words, "My mom is a builder and a heart for the O." His voice caught as he said he was sorry, not only for the wedding, but for letting someone else decide what I meant to him. I told him that forgiveness is not erasing the past. It is giving both of us a chance to build something better. I said he could start by joining one of the community projects funded by my scholarship program. He nodded and said he would. Within a week, he was teaching design basics to a group of school children, helping them paint benches and repair a playground. A month later, we stood side by side at the site of a library renovation, watching volunteers measure shelves and sand window frames. The light poured in through the tall glass, catching the dust in the air like gold flecks. I looked at him and said he was still my son. Then I asked to see what he could build. He smiled, and for the first time in years I believed we might find a way forward, a one careful step at a time.